Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Andrea Moorhead. Before we dive in, let's start, as always, with a little house cleaning. The feedback about this show continues to grow, which means there is an abundant need for people to be heard. Many of the emails I've received are from people who have never ever shared their stories with anyone. But this show has really given them the strength, they tell me, to know they're not alone and to finally speak up and speak out. The first 3 episodes of this show have really given you kind of a glimpse of my story and hearing some of the details of how I was treated. I want to pose a few questions to you. What would you have done? Would you have stayed or walked away? What about this? If you decide to sue your employer and you're able to reach a financial settlement where you take the money, you sign an NDA, and you promise to never disclose how much they paid you nor talk about the case, will money take away the pain that you endured? Will the money make you feel better? In other words, is your silence for sale? Since I walked out on June 5th of 2020, my story has been covered in national news outlets, and I have received hundreds of emails, as I mentioned, from people who have endured workplace trauma, like myself. And while everyone's experiences, they are similar yet different, the one aspect that all of these cases have in common, a 4-letter word. F, not that word, F-E-A-R. Every single person has told me that the fear of retaliation, the fear of retribution, the fear that they will lose their income, the fear of unable to secure another job in the future. Those are just some of the reasons why people say they stayed silent. And I understand. I really do. Because I was almost that person. It's a very complex scenario. And everyone can justify their decision based on their experience. And of course, the need to financially survive. As I said in this LinkedIn post that garnered close to 100,000 impressions from around the world, justice is defined by the person who seeks it. What justice looks like to you may be different from what it looks like for someone else. However, I believe that the process of seeking justice should be equitable. Let me say that for the people in the back who might not have heard me. The process of seeking justice should be equitable. We'll delve more into that in the coming weeks and the months as we begin to discuss solutions to the systemic problem of workplace bullying. But please know that whichever choice you make, you have to live with your decision and all of the potential ramifications, and there are many. No one has a crystal ball to tell you this will happen to you if you take this route. But I can tell you that, unfortunately, this trauma will last with you forever. So we really have to be intentional about learning ways in which to manage this pain, because triggers are real. And as you heard in episode 3, at any moment, the triggers, you'll hear them. You might become sad again, maybe depressed, and that anger will rise up in you out of nowhere, and it will consume you all over again. In full transparency, although I've availed myself of 4 therapists with specific expertise as part of my healing journey, I still have moments. But I'm able to rebound much faster now because I remind myself of all that I've gained from walking away. I've gained peace, I've gained joy, and I've gained freedom and the right to speak my truth, which is the only truth that I have been holding in for over 15 years. The wonderful life that I now finally have supports my decision to walk away, to not accept the settlement, and to speak out to help others, to help you know that you're not alone. And I believe that all of us, we have to be part of this movement to reimagine and to change laws that adequately protect victims and witnesses of workplace bullying. I now want to share the remaining unconscionable behaviors that solely focus on management. After all, coworkers who were part of the bullying, they were emboldened to continue their disrespect because managers, including the HR department, they fail to hold people accountable. You now become the target because management is now concerned with how are we going to mitigate any potential liability for the company. Oh, what a tangled web they weave when first they practice and continue to deceive. In all candor, I hope the VP of News at my former station, who I saw subscribed to this show, I hope you're watching, and perhaps you'll learn how the inaction of management is complicity. Please share this information with the GM and your entire team, because I don't want this to happen to anyone else. You can do better. Have you ever had to watch videos that deal with harassment, diversity, equity and inclusion, etc., etc., etc.? Well, we likely all have at some point. We have to sign off that we watched it or that we read the company handbook that affirms that if you see something, you should say something. They run down the order in which you should voice your concerns, from going straight to the coworker to your supervisor, followed by maybe the department head, and last resort, human resources. Employees, we reasonably believe that the company really cares, that they're going to do everything in its power to protect all employees and ensure that everyone is working in a non-hostile environment. But what they don't tell you is that when management personnel are the bullies, you already know where I'm going with this, they rarely, if ever, hold themselves accountable. Often between management and human resources, they're all in cahoots. I love that word. They're in cahoots with one another to protect themselves and the company. I will say this time and time again. Human resources, HR, is not your friend. Use them for the basics. Gather information for maternity leave, maybe your 401k, etc., things of that nature. And here's why I say HR is not your friend. I can't tell you how many times I went to the HR department of one and shared the egregious behaviors. That person never wrote anything down. I never signed any paperwork with a written statement of my experiences. I don't think they ever placed my concerns and/or complaints in my file or the files of the coworkers who I made complaints about, much less management. In fact, when I specifically told her about the news director walking through the newsroom, making loud statements as he was impersonating, wait for it, Strom Thurmond, can't make this up, nothing was done. I know you're thinking, who does that? Yes, this person thought that he was clever and funny. And it always happened during his earlier years there when he came to the station as an executive producer. Again, HR didn't take any action. Because from time to time, he would continue to do it. And I don't know if other people complained, but I know I did. Strom Thurmond, as we all know, a very staunch opponent of the Civil Rights Act of 1957. When this then executive producer was promoted to news director after having been passed over for the same position 3 years prior, I was asked by the then general manager regarding my opinion about the promotion. I mentioned this in the last episode. I unequivocally told the GM that he would not be a good fit in that role because he had proven himself to be unfair in the past and was always lying, which you'll hear more specifics about that a little later. But he was promoted anyway. I like to say birds of a feather flock together. When the announcement was made, I told my husband and my parents, I said, quote, because remember, my life centers around soundbites. I said, this is not going to be a good move for me. I knew it. I instinctively knew that he specifically was going to be a problem. And specifically, I was going to be his problem. Sure, I could call him a racist. As I mentioned in a prior episode, the company's attorney asked me during the depositions if I told him that he was being racist. The implication was that because I failed to say that to him, then he wasn't being racially insensitive. Doesn't make any sense, does it? His reaction would have been, no, I'm not, of course. This is part of the circuitous game that is intentionally being played by upper management. But I knew, based on his character, how he suggestively interacted with others, not my story to tell. Also, his poor judgment and lack of good character would be detrimental for me. I believe the GM at the time told the newly minted news director that I didn't approve of his promotion. Now, this isn't the only reason why I was treated unfairly by him, but it did lay the foundation for him to kind of ratchet up the horrible behavior of gaslighting. If you're wondering what is gaslighting, it's lies, lies, lies. In other words, it's not him. I'm the problem. You're the problem. It's never them. It's always you. Narcissism is real, and the effects of it are emotionally and physically detrimental to anyone who's in a relationship of any sort with such a person. In the middle of a newsroom meeting and pizza party, he threw for the newsroom staff at the beginning of his reign, and I call it a reign because it was a reign. Horrible reign for me. Anyway, he made a disparaging statement about a coworker who walked in to grab a slice of pizza and walked out to begin preparing their story for the 5 p.m. show. Well, I told this reporter about what was said because it was horrible. It was disparaging. And they, in turn, emailed the news director and told him that he heard about the statement. Well, the news director responded to this reporter's email and actually insinuated, without any knowledge, that I was the one who told him. Yeah, he actually wrote my name in the email. I see it. I have it. So what do? I said to the news director, I heard what you said, and in the future, I would appreciate you coming to me and asking me directly before you make an accusation or allegation against me, because one thing you will get from me is the unadulterated truth. If you had asked, I would have told you, yes, I did, and what you said was wrong. The spirit behind my statement to him was kind of keep my name out of your mouth until you know that I'm involved. Yes, I did tell that person. But the fact that the news director automatically thought that out of a room of 30 or so people of diverse backgrounds, that I was the one who told this person who happens to be black, that's yet another example of the implicit bias that exists. Without proof, either being told by the reporter or by me, he made an assumption based on race. And the fact that I challenged his thinking to his face was met with an increase of bullying, specifically by him. I was told by the current GM in June of 2019, and sitting with this new news director in a closed-door meeting, that they wanted me to create a franchise, a special segment that only I would host and produce. So, being the professional that I am, I sent both of them an email with the show name and the ideas, which they loved. I was going to focus on stories of people who overcome obstacles. It was named The Comeback, as my own journey of resiliency and perseverance during my own cancer fight was really the inspirational foundation for this franchise. Thank you, Rico. I emailed my story ideas, and I never received a response after that. I talked to producers about it, and they all said, you have to talk to the news director. So that meeting was in June. July passes, no response. August passes, no response. September rolls around, still no response. So I sent another email asking about when I could begin filming and scheduling time to shoot my franchise stories. Well, he finally responds, and he says to stand down. He says they wanted to have time to work on a really cool and impactful promotion or commercial, if you will, for my franchise. October again keeps rolling through, and you guessed it, still nothing. So one afternoon, I see a promo for another female anchor's franchise called A Seat at the Table. I immediately send another email to the news director, and I ask again why my hands have been tied from producing my franchise. And I requested to have a one-on-one meeting with him. So I go into his office, and he proceeds to tell me that I dropped the ball. I sat there literally befuddled. And I said, what do you mean by that? I can't drop a ball when I was never given one. I also said I have the emails to prove that you dropped the ball and told me to, quote, stand down. He verbally denied it. So I had to go get ready for the show. The meeting ended with no resolution. I walk out, sit back to my desk. I retrieve our email messages and exchanges because I'm like, I'm going to prove to you that you dropped the ball, right? I wanted to redirect his attention to our last correspondence that clearly showed he dropped the ball. The gaslighting was simply insane. Now, this is all happening during the coveted sweeps period, when anchors and reporters do special reports with major big promotions, and even our sales department, they get in on the action because they're able to, during this time called sweeps, it typically calls for an increase in prices for the advertisers. I became really concerned of what the news director may have been telling the general manager, that the reason why I was not in the ratings book, which was supposed to be, for all of us, all the anchors, we were supposed to be in the ratings book, was because I failed to suggest a story idea and wasn't prepared. In other words, a lie about my work ethic as a cover. So I wrote an email about my concerns, and I showed the GM in black and white that the news director blatantly lied and that I had not been given the opportunity to produce my franchise, but other anchors were able to do theirs. Crickets from the GM. I never heard back. I came up with another story idea about the lack of tax incentives in the state of Indiana for movie productions, which were being shot in nearby states and even across the border. In fact, one of the stories was about the film on the first black female millionaire, Madam C.J. Walker from Indianapolis, the Netflix movie about her life produced by LeBron James's production company. I have known Walker's great-great-granddaughter for over 20 years, and I was really hoping to get access behind the scenes. While other anchors were able to travel out of the country for the Olympics coverage, even in Canada, doing stories about the cheaper cost of insulin compared to the cost in the U.S., I was met with a no. Okay, so I pivot. I focused on local film producers and even members of the legislature who were taking up the issue in the State House, and had also planned to vote on tax incentives as the state was missing out on millions of dollars. Well, the story was shot, it was ready to air, and I was excited. I was given an air date of a Tuesday evening. Well, the Thursday prior, I realized they haven't shot a promo for this. So I asked one of the executive producers about the status of the promo. And she tells me, your story is not airing. Of course, I'm like, well, why not? And she said, you need to go speak with the news director about that. So about 30 minutes before the 5 p.m. show, I sent another email to the news director, and I requested a meeting. And I also requested an explanation. I go over my scripts one last time. I head to the makeup room to prepare for the broadcast, and I anchor my show. So I'm done around 5:30. I return to the newsroom. I sit down at my desk, and I begin going over my scripts for the 6 p.m. show. Now remember, I have been promoted to the 6 p.m. broadcast, but your promotion comes with no pay increase. It was duties as assigned, so they said during the deposition. I love that, duties as assigned. Anyway, as I'm sitting down with my headset on my ears, obviously, I'm poring over my scripts. I'm also watching my monitors, watching the other newscasts from the competition on my computer screen. All of a sudden, I'm startled by 4 rapid succession pokes on my left shoulder from behind. Here's what that looked like. It's kind of amazing what you can find on the internet, right? All I did was type in poking on shoulder, and this is what came up. It's also ironic that the animation appropriately matches our race. Although the news director didn't have a mullet, and I wasn't smiling. First, if you've ever known anyone diagnosed with cancer, our bones, they are so brittle from the chemotherapy. And remember, I'm still undergoing immunotherapy treatments at the same time. So anything touching me hurt, let alone an intentional poking. The news director told me to come to his office, and as he walked away, I sat there for what felt like an eternity, and I was masking the pain of the poking, but I was totally aghast that he even touched me to begin with. Now, are you ready for his excuses during the depositions? It was that I always have my headsets on. And poking me, well, he didn't say poking. He just said touching me was the only way to get my attention. Another lie. What about an email? How about calling me on my phone extension? Here's a novel idea. How about standing in front of my desk? I love how a necessary part of my job that they provide, a computer, monitor, headsets, that everyone uses and has on throughout the entire day as they're at work, listening to and watching our stories, watching the competition, was now used against me. I can't make this stuff up. He actually lied during the so-called investigation, also with the VP, and said that it was a soft pat. I know the difference between a soft pat and a poke. Again, my voice wasn't believed. I just love how easily management's explanations are really lies, and those lies are believed, even with irrefutable evidence. After about 10 seconds of composing myself, I go to his office, and he tells me that they're going to air the story 4 months later during the February book the next year. So I asked why, and he just said, "We want to get more eyeballs on you." Okay, I don't know what that means. You know what I despise the most is when people think stroking someone's ego will make them comply with their orders and make them feel good. Doesn't affect me. So here's the second irrational moment dealing with the news director. That was again voiced in an email to the general manager, who still refused to do anything, refused to address the issues. And here's how I know the ND was lying and refused to tell me the truth. Unbeknownst to him, the male co-anchor had told me during the 5 p.m. show that he had just spoken to the news director earlier in the day, requesting that one of his Olympic stories should air on Tuesday. The same show, same time slot. The news director acquiesced and canceled my story in favor of a repeated Olympics story. Can't make this up. You know, sometimes life is crazier than anything we could ever create or see in a movie or on a television series. Fast forward to January 2020, when my tax incentive film story finally aired on Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Oh, by the way, my completed story was lost in the system. It had to be shot all over again. They lost my story, and I had to do it all over again. In January, I began to work on a sweep story for the February ratings period. And as always, I came prepared with my story ideas to share with the news director, the assistant news director, 2 executive producers, and someone from the promotions department. I suggested a story about an upholstery company that was really taking advantage of people by taking their down payments, but never providing the service. And my parents' local church was one of the victims. Our church and other victims, they lost thousands of dollars. Specifically, the church lost thousands of dollars after the woman failed to reupholster the church pews. The management team, they loved it. Again, they lied in the depositions and said that I didn't contribute to providing content and failed to go to work prepared. They were practically, at this moment, salivating. And of the 3 stories I presented via a visual handout on paper with the ideas, the interviewees, for their consideration, they all agreed and approved that I do the upholstery scam story. But there was one caveat that I would have to share with the audience, that the church's pastors were my parents. And I already knew that that was going to be an issue, but not a problem, as that's part of our journalistic ethics and responsibility to disclose the connection. That's normal, again, expected and understood. The story that included my parents and 2 other victims was written, it was completed, and it was sent to the producer to review. Well, a couple of days passed, and I had not received any feedback, so I sent an email to the producer again, who comes over and tells me, "Give me all of your research, give me your completed story, give me everything, because we're going to give that to the female weekend evening anchor to write and present." Now, the story was already written. I asked why, and she said, "I don't know. You need to go, guess what, talk to the news director about it." I hand over all my materials, and then I sent an email to the news director requesting to talk about the why my story was being taken away. So I'm sitting at my desk dumbfounded, but preparing for the 5 p.m. broadcast. It's around 3:30 or so, and all of a sudden, another rapid succession of 4 pokes on my left shoulder, commanding me to come to his office. Other coworkers saw it, and I immediately texted someone who saw it and, in fact, made eye contact with me and shrugged their shoulders like, what in the tomfoolery is going on now? I quickly sent a text to this person and said, this is the second time he has poked me and touched me. I asked in this text, what should I tell him so that he will stop touching me? Now, I didn't have time to read or respond as I was walking to the news director's office. This second time after the poke, I'm very upset because this was a moment where he felt empowered. This was the animus. There was animus behind the poking. It was clear that this egregious tactic helped him feel emboldened, as if I was a child and he was going to put me in my place. Likely because he knew from the GM that I had been complaining about him. So I sit down, I cross my legs, I lay my hands with my phone in my lap, and the first thing out of his mouth was, what's the beef going on between us? I'll never, ever forget it. Another soundbite of my life. To say that I was stunned, there are no words. I sat there trying to let the moment sink in, and I tried to calm myself because I knew that I had to remain professional, because if I negatively reacted, I would be the one held accountable, not him for his initial comment. First, who says, what's the beef anymore? I didn't know if he was joking. I didn't know. I didn't know if this was his attempt to use what he thought as a colloquialism within the Black community. I don't know, trying to connect with me. Or if it was an attempt to intimidate me and to make me defensive so that he could use that against me. It was the latter. You know the tropes. She was aggressive. She's loud. She's an angry Black woman. I knew better than to give him that satisfaction. So I said very calmly, and I looked right into his eyes, and I said, no. Do you have beef with me? Sounds so ridiculous, doesn't it? Like, who even says that? I cringe even when I say it. It's almost like he had watched an episode of, 21 Jump Street, and he was going to be down with me. But it was much more than that. When he realized that I didn't fall for that, he then proceeds to tell me that the executive producers had been telling him that I was not communicating with them about what I needed to properly schedule my stories. I literally said to him, that's a lie. Oh yeah, I said it. I said, that's a lie. Because I knew the truth. Furthermore, I said, I over-communicate with both of them and everyone. So I don't believe you. What you're saying to me is a lie. He was stumped again. By the way, after that meeting, I went to one of those two executive producers who allegedly said I wasn't communicating properly with them. And she told me that she nor the other producer said that to the news director. And in fact, they said, or this person said, I was the best in communicating my story ideas, photographer needs, and everything to them. So she didn't know where he got that from. Aren't you tired? I know I am. Back to the news director. He then says, well, from now on, go through me to set up your stories. Now, this made absolutely no sense because as long as I have been in the business for 35 years, that has never been the role of a news director. You see what's happening? He was kind of like pulling spaghetti out of thin air and just throwing it against the wall. Well, I was the wall. He was throwing it in my face to see what's going to stick to make her submit to me. Then he explained that my story was taken away because there was, quote, a conflict of interest, because my parents were part of the story. I said, you guys approved it. You all knew that my church was a victim, the church that I attend, that my parents pastor. I asked, what's the conflict? All right, get ready for more gaslighting, the pile-on of gaslighting, which, again, are lies. He then says, well, I spoke with corporate and they're concerned about your profile and how this story would affect your brand. What? Now you're concerned about affecting my brand because of a story? Really? Another moment to try to feed my ego. Didn't work. And it didn't make sense. He then says he was instructed by corporate that someone else would have to do the story. Now, Tegna owns 64 stations around the country. And I sat there thinking to myself, you mean to tell me of the thousands of anchors and reporters across the country, they're worried about little old me in Indianapolis and a 3.5-minute story about an upholstery scam? Of course not. The bottom line, there was no conflict of interest. Our ethical and professional mandate is that we divulge to our audience our connection to a story, if there is one. Here's the truth, and why his explanation was a bold-faced lie. 2 male anchors did stories about themselves, specifically about their recent health struggles and surgeries. I mean, capturing them before, during, and even after the surgeries. Where's the conflict? By the way, I never did a story about my breast cancer. Also, the female anchor did a 2-part story about her church pastors who adopted a baby. Where's the conflict of interest there? Oh, and an investigative reporter did several iterations about their mother being scammed. I ask, where's the conflict? And a male co-anchor did several stories about someone using his own picture on social media to scam an older woman into giving money to the scam artist overseas. Again, I ask, where's the conflict? There was no conflict. It was lies, lies, lies. And I was supposed to just accept not being able to do my job and never question his authority. Another email sent to this general manager about this turn of events. Again, no response. During COVID, we were broadcasting from home, and I was taken off the 5 p.m. And I asked why. And the news director said my signal was poor. It wasn't. I mean, how can the signal be bad for the 5 p.m., but it's good for the 6 and the 11? Make it make sense. It didn't. Now that I've confirmed that the female 5 p.m. anchor was given a managerial role, it was very convenient that the entire 5 p.m. show was crafted to leave me out altogether. She was effectively controlling what I could and could not do because she was part of management. The news director and the assistant news director could be easily manipulated. And I knew that that was their character. And I warned the previous GM that both of them were not suited to run our newsroom. And they're now running newsrooms elsewhere in the country. See what happens when we don't speak up and people aren't held accountable? They continue to thrive. I sent an email about this to the GM, and yep, no response. There's something to be said about employees who are personal friends with management. They hang out on the weekends with each other, go to each other's homes, dole out free Pacers tickets. I go to work to work. I'm professional and respectful, have always been. That's my character. But that's never a match for personal relationships that kind of spill over in the work environment, and that affects management's judgment. And the last moment I will now share with you is one that is very personal. It's all personal, but this one really hit me hard, beyond having my stories yanked away for no legitimate reason. This one is about the core of how God made me and the agency that I have over my body. During chemotherapy, like most people, I lost all of my hair. I tried on what seemed like every imaginable wig that I would feel comfortable with on the air. I made a few mishaps. But you know what? My hair was the least of my concerns. I was just so happy, so grateful to be alive. Because I knew my hair was going to grow back. And if it didn't, I was also fine with that too. Because I had a second chance at life. And that was more important to me than my hair. Nevertheless, I wore a variety of wigs over the course of my treatments. Well, one evening, as I'm walking into the ladies' room to prepare for the 5 p.m. show, I kind of take a look. There's this big mirror. As soon as you walk in, it's to the left. I looked at myself, and I didn't see my true essence. Ooh, I'm getting goosebumps saying this because I remember it was such a moment. What I mean by that is I didn't recognize the woman who 5 hours prior to arriving at the station, I looked quite different, and I liked it. I was so proud of how far I had come in my cancer battle, and I just stood there looking into the mirror at myself, and I smiled. For me, the wigs were itchy, they were hot, and they were just simply uncomfortable. So in that moment, I just pulled it off, and I went on the air with my natural hair. This moment was born out of necessity, and not necessarily to send a message, But my email was filled with dozens of well wishes from viewers who say they were inspired by my courage of wearing my natural hair. After the show was over, I returned to the newsroom and I sit down at my desk to prepare for the 6 p.m. broadcast. And I see the news director kind of walking quickly over to my desk. Now, he doesn't poke me this time, thankfully, but he does say, "Meet me in the conference room." He's standing in front of my desk, which is where he could have been the first time, but he says, "Meet me in the conference room." So he begins by saying that the GM called him while I was on the air and wanted to know, had I informed the news director that I was going on the air with my natural hair? And the news director's response was, "I told him that we talked about it, but I wanted you to know that he grilled me about it." And I responded, "Why did you lie?" I didn't say anything to anyone, nor did I think I needed to, as I was wearing different wigs all the time. Only this time it was my own natural hair. The news director then says, and I'll never forget this, "Next time, make sure you inform me that you're going to do this." And what did I do? I responded, "Well, I pray there's no need to ever inform you, because I hope I don't get cancer again." Drop the mic. I walked out. I finished preparing for the 6 p.m. broadcast. And I look back, and this moment of honoring my own personal journey, my health journey, being proud of winning my cancer battle, this moment was forever marred by a man telling me to ask permission next time I decide to wear my natural hair. I didn't need the Crown Act, which bans hair discrimination and was passed 6 months later, to know that this moment, it was wrong and it was discriminatory. The news director was upset with me because my failure to tell him got him in trouble with his boss. In hindsight, is there anything I could have done to protect myself from any of these egregious behaviors? No. The problem belonged to them and their failure to treat me fairly. Imagine dealing with all of these transgressions that I've shared in the first 3 episodes and now this one. How this would affect your mental health while also battling cancer. Gaslighting in the workplace is a very real problem. It's a form of abuse. It's a form of emotional arson. In fact, according to the Workplace Bullying Project, this is gaslighting. They tell blatant lies, lies, and more lies. They deny that which they are accused of, despite clear evidence. They project their feelings onto you. They align other people against you and tell them you're the crazy one. They say a lot of words, followed by 0 actions. They positively reinforce you with fake compliments. They challenge your recollection of the past events. Been there, done that. They claim you are over-emotional. They abide by the rules for thee, but not for me maxim. They tell you that you're crazy and imagining things. They say words and phrases like, "You're being sensitive," "You're overthinking," "You misunderstood," and "That's not what I said." They wear you down over time with all of these tactics to the point that you begin to feel like you may actually be crazy. I tried to make sense of the egregious behaviors against me. I knew it was wrong, but I was also helpless. The GM and HR failed to hold anyone accountable. And yes, I thought I was going crazy, which is why I had to see therapists to navigate the environment, but also to build up my reservoir of courage so that I could walk away. Hear me when I say this. Your emotional intelligence and intuition, your gut, will offend anyone who attempts to manipulate you. Let that sink in. After the mediation in 2020, the EEOC granted me the right to sue in federal court. After the depositions, both parties were going to ask for summary judgment, meaning the judge would read both briefs, decide if we go to trial, or if it was denied, meaning the case is over. That gamble for me was simply too high, because to be successful in proving discrimination based on the current laws on the book, you have to show that they called you the N-word or left the noose on your desk. Current laws don't adequately address workplace bullying, so I had to make a choice. My goal all along was for people to hear and see the truth. And that would have never happened had I accepted the settlement offer to let this case just go away. On the Thursday prior to the Monday deadline, I went for a walk, and again, as I mentioned in another episode, I asked God, what should I do? I had been reading John Lewis's memoir, and again, page 64 kept ringing in my ear about the spirit of history and how moments in our lives, they happen so that we can use them as a testimony for others and a testimony for change. After my walk, I told my husband, and I called my parents, and I let them know that I would not accept the settlement offer. By the way, I heard the defendant's attorney told my attorney to tell me to take it. Tell her to take it, because it's a lot of money. But I've always known that my purpose in life and the reason why I became a journalist was to hold institutions and people accountable, to tell stories of hope, inspiration, to inform people, to give to the voiceless, and to be part of the spirit of history for good change that benefits all of us. My legal team waited to the very last moment before the 12:30 p.m. deadline to accept the offer or not accept it. I wanted to leave no room for negotiations. My heart was settled. We said no at 12:30. And now I became the source for another journalist to read all of this, to adequately write a story about my departure from the station, which the Indianapolis Star had been asking to write a story about my case for over a year. Perhaps I naively anticipated that they would sift through all of these documents, the emails, the copies of the text, voicemails, the verbatim of the VP of Human Resources as to their investigative findings, and to really compare it to the truth and expose the truth. Well, I found out that the powers that be at the Indianapolis Star, where I served as an intern back in 1988, didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to touch it. Yet they published an article earlier about why I dropped the case without ever talking to me to get my statement, which is the very basic rule of journalism, to get both sides. While the former station has never made a statement about my case and the truth of what really happened and their involvement or lack thereof, the only thing they've said was that I was fired in January of 2021. Again, I say, you can't fire someone who quit the year before on June 5th, 2020. That so-called firing was to take me off of their disability, take me off of their payroll. That's the fact. I had already left 7-8 months prior. The legal process is really nothing more than a game for defendants. In fact, during the mediation, when the GM said, I want you back, the former GM wants you back, and the news director wants you back, but they failed to discuss and share what's going to be different. These are legitimate issues, and change is necessary for me to come back. But they failed to hold anyone accountable, including themselves, because they wanted to protect their jobs and all of their friends who were part of the unconscionable behavior. I said it. I told the mediator to share with them that I would never return. So here we are at an impasse. The GM's response during that meeting, I'm not going to give you a golden parachute, another soundbite, meaning we're not going to let you leave us and pay you to ride off into the sunset to live your better than best life. And therein, in my mind, began the legal battle. I knew what their objective was. As I mentioned, I wanted to parade all of the players in court to help line up the facts and the irrefutable evidence against their lies. This became what I call the game of chess versus checkers. I realized their focus was on money and hiding the truth. My focus was always on accountability, improving the workplace so that I could continue to do what I love and for the truth to prevail. Now that I've had the benefit of time, I should have known that they didn't really know me, nor understand who I am, my character. First off, the current GM called me by another name for the first year that he was working there, as the promotion director. I had to literally stop him in the hallway and say to him, "That's not my name." That's a sign. That's a red flag, if you will, that there was never an intention to see me and to hear me. There was no respect. There was always a feeling of uneasiness when I had conversations with many of the managers, actually most of the people there. And I could see it and feel it because I knew them. I knew their move before they even knew their move. And most importantly, I knew their hearts. In their minds, I was there to take commands. I was there to do a job. I was there to get paid whatever they wanted to pay me and not to be fair. And I was there to be grateful that I was simply given an opportunity. I'm going to always be outspoken about my experience, to give real, intangible context to workplace bullying. I'm never going to be silent. They must have forgotten I'm a journalist. I'm a storyteller, and this is the biggest story of my life that I will forever talk about to help save others and to change laws to better protect victims and witnesses of workplace bullying. The late Congressman John Lewis, his autobiography, Walking with the Wind, says if no one raises the alarm, if no one raises their voices to demand change, then it won't happen. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass said it's imperative for us to agitate the system. Again, there's no beef here. We're simply agitating the system for good change. So let's go. Thank you for watching, for liking and subscribing to this channel, and please share it with others. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if no one else believes your experience, I do. I see you and I hear you, and thriving is your birthright. Please be well and share wellness. I'll talk to you next week.